Imagine it's the year 975. A Viking longship cuts through the cold Nordic waters, its striped sail catching the wind as it approaches a snow-dusted settlement nestled between towering fjords. If you love alternate history and what-if scenarios, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The ship's crew hauls cargo onto the frozen beach, furs, amber, and weapons gleaming in the pale Arctic light. But one merchant carries something far stranger than anything his people have ever seen, a small wooden chest filled with dark beans from lands so distant, so impossibly far south, that most Vikings would never believe such a place exists. That evening, the great hall fills with the smell of roasted meat and wood smoke. Drinking horns overflow with mead and ale, the traditional drinks that have fueled Norse warriors and traders for centuries. The long tables groan under platters of fish and bread. Firelight dances across the faces of the settlement's most powerful people, jarls, their wives, skilled warriors, and the settlement's leading craftspeople. Everyone is gathered. Everyone is waiting. The merchant stands near the central hearth, unwrapping his mysterious cargo with deliberate slowness. He's traveled farther than any man from this settlement. His cloak is salt-stained and worn from months at sea. In his weathered hands, he holds a clay vessel unlike anything the Vikings have ever seen. Smooth, exotic, marked with strange symbols. He pours dark liquid into a drinking horn. It's so black, it seems to absorb the firelight. The hall falls silent. What is this? Where did it come from? The merchant explains, his voice steady and commanding. The drink is called coffee, he tells them. It grows in distant lands, Arabia, Egypt, places beyond the reach of their maps. For centuries, merchants from warmer kingdoms have drunk this brew. It sharpens the mind. It keeps a man awake through the longest nights. It steadies the hand of a warrior before battle. The gathered Vikings lean forward, skeptical but intrigued. Their entire world runs on ale and mead. These are the drinks of celebration, of communion, of daily sustenance. The idea of something else, something that doesn't bring drunken joy, but instead promises clarity and strength, feels almost threatening. A grizzled warrior with scarred arms and a massive beard reaches out and sniffs the vessel. His expression twists. Bitter, he mutters, unnatural. Why would a man drink something that tastes foul when good mead is right here? Others nod in agreement. The merchant doesn't argue. Instead, he raises the horn to his own lips and drinks deeply. The hall watches in absolute silence as he lowers the vessel. His eyes are bright. His posture straightens. He doesn't sway or slur. His mind is sharp. Who among you is brave enough to taste what the world beyond our waters drinks? The merchant's confidence is magnetic. One by one, the curious begin to step forward. A young woman in a fine wool tunic, her hair braided with silver thread, reaches for the horn first. Then a craftsman. Then another warrior, younger and less skeptical than the first. Each one tastes the dark, bitter liquid. Each one reacts with surprise. Not pleasure exactly, but a strange awakening. Their eyes widen. They feel lighter, more alert. The night deepens. Snow begins to fall outside the great hall, swirling past the wooden walls where torches flicker in the darkness. Inside, the merchant begins to explain more. He describes the markets of Cairo, the caravans crossing endless deserts, the coffee houses of the Arab world where men gather not to get drunk, but to think, to talk, to plan. He describes merchants and scholars sitting for hours, cups of coffee in hand, conducting business and debates with minds sharp as their swords. He describes how this drink could change everything about how Vikings approach their winters, their raids, their long voyages across dark waters. Not as a replacement for ale, never that, but as something new, something different, something powerful. The hall is electric now with possibility and debate. Some men remain convinced it's a trick or a poison. Others are already imagining long ships full of wakeful sailors, able to navigate through longer nights. Raiders who don't tire. Traders who can negotiate for days without the fog of alcohol clouding their judgment. The merchant sits back, his work for the evening done. He's planted a seed. In this moment, in this single great hall, surrounded by snow and darkness and the howling wind off the fjords, the future of the Viking Age is about to change. The question is no longer whether coffee exists. The question is whether the Norse people will let it transform everything they know. The first warrior to drink coffee doesn't sleep for 3 days. He's a raider named Bjorn, known for his strength but not his strategy. And when the dark liquid hits his blood, something shifts. His eyes stay open through the midnight hours. His hands don't shake. His mind doesn't drift toward the mead haze that normally dulls a man's senses by evening. When his crew sets out on the next raid across the North Sea, Bjorn drinks the coffee again. And this time, his crew notices. They hit their target harder. They move faster. They leave before the local militia can organize a defense. Word spreads like wildfire through the longhouses. Warriors begin asking questions. Where is this drink? How do you get it? Within weeks, the skalds are singing about the dark brew that keeps a man sharp when exhaustion would normally break him. Traders catch on next. A merchant named Eric controls the northern routes to the Baltic, and he's always struggled with the same problem that plagues all seafarers: the fog of exhaustion during long voyages. You can't trust your instincts when you're barely awake. You can't read the stars when your eyes are closing against your will. But coffee changes that. Eric stations himself at the helm with a drinking horn full of the precious liquid, and suddenly he's making runs that would have killed lesser men. 3 weeks at sea without losing focus. His cargo arrives intact. His profits double. His competitors start demanding their own supply. And now coffee isn't just a curiosity, it's becoming currency. Coffee doesn't grow in Scandinavia. It can't. The climate is all wrong. And the Norse aren't farmers in the way that Mediterranean cultures are. They raid, they trade, they conquer. But they don't cultivate exotic plants. That means every bean has to come from somewhere else. And that means whoever controls the supply controls something valuable. A chief named Ragnar understands this immediately. He begins hoarding coffee, rationing it to his most loyal warriors and his most important traders. Suddenly, being offered a cup of coffee becomes a sign of status. It means you're trusted. The ceremonial aspect transforms the culture in ways no one anticipates. The old rituals centered on mead. A man proved his worth by drinking deep, by holding his liquor, by staying conscious longer than his rivals. Mead ceremonies bound men together, but they also made them slower, duller, less sharp. Coffee ceremonies are different. They're quieter, more intentional. A man sips the dark brew and stays alert. His mind clears. He thinks better. And for a culture that's always valued cunning alongside strength, this is revolutionary. The young men start preferring coffee to mead. The older generations resist, calling it a coward's drink, something that gives unfair advantage. But the advantage is real, and it's undeniable. A raider who drinks coffee before battle is measurably more effective than one who doesn't. If this is clicking for you, drop a like, because what happens next reshapes the entire Viking economy. Traders begin establishing routes specifically to acquire coffee. Ships that once carried only weapons and plunder now carry coffee alongside silk and spices from the east. The ports become busier. The demand creates new jobs. New markets emerge. A man can become wealthy just by being the middleman between the coffee source and the Norse demand. The supply chain that forms around this single plant becomes as important to Norse power as their ships and their swords ever were. And the rituals keep evolving. Coffee houses begin to appear in the largest settlements, places where men gather not to get drunk, but to stay sharp and discuss strategy. Traders meet there to negotiate deals. Warriors meet there to plan raids. Skalds gather to compose verses. The culture that built itself on ale-soaked feasts is slowly shifting towards something faster, more calculated, more driven by caffeine and ambition than by mead and tradition. The old guard doesn't like it. Some chieftains ban coffee, declaring it unnatural, a corruption of the old ways. But their warriors drink it in secret. Their traders use it to outcompete rivals who won't embrace the change. And slowly, inevitably, the ban falls away because the results speak for themselves. A Viking age powered by coffee is sharper, faster, more ruthless. The raids become more coordinated. The voyages go farther. The trade networks expand more quickly. The culture is changing, and coffee is just the catalyst. But something else is happening too, something that no one quite predicted. As coffee becomes more widespread, the very nature of what it means to be Viking starts to shift. The shift is subtle at first, but within a generation, the effects become undeniable. Viking raids become less about mindless pillaging and more about calculated strikes. A coffee-fueled Jarl sits in his longhouse, studying maps by firelight with a clarity that his grandfather never possessed. He's thinking 3 moves ahead instead of 1. He knows which monasteries hold the most wealth, which trade routes are vulnerable, which alliances will hold. The Berserker still exists, yes, but he's no longer the backbone of Norse warfare. He's becoming an exception rather than the rule. Meanwhile, something equally transformative is happening in the merchant class. Coffee requires constant supply, and supply requires organization. Young traders begin establishing permanent routes not just to the Middle East, but deeper into it. They build relationships with Arab merchants, learn languages, understand markets. These aren't raiders anymore. They're businessmen wearing wolf furs. They're negotiating prices, discussing profit margins, planning for next season's voyage before this season's ship has even returned. The wealth this generates is staggering. Without the constant drain of failed, chaotic raids, without warriors dying in drunken brawls, the Norse economy stabilizes. Resources flow into shipbuilding and exploration, rather than funeral rites and blood feuds. A merchant prince in Dublin, a Norse settler, watches the evening light fade over the Irish coast and realizes his coffee-fueled mind has calculated something remarkable. The western route to the New World is viable, completely viable. It's only a matter of time and capital. The Norse, sharpened by caffeine and driven by merchant ambition, begin launching expeditions with purpose. They're not lost explorers stumbling onto distant shores. They're purposeful colonists with supply chains, backup plans, and the mental clarity to maintain settlements across impossible distances. Vinland becomes more than a footnote in sagas. It becomes a thriving outpost. Back in Scandinavia, the narrative fractures entirely from our timeline. Kings invest in universities instead of just fortifications. Runestones begin recording commercial treaties, not just victories. The Viking Age doesn't end with the Norman conquest or the spread of Christianity. It transforms into something else entirely. The Norse don't disappear from history. They become the dominant commercial power of the medieval world, rivaling the Venetian and Hanseatic merchants centuries later. Their forts don't fade, they multiply. Coffee-fueled Norse explorers reach Africa decades before the Portuguese. They establish trade colonies on every major coast. The very concept of Europe's medieval period shifts because the Norse never decline. They evolve, and their evolution is irreversible. Even the cultural impact is impossible to overstate. Norse art becomes infused with geometric patterns borrowed from Islamic design. Norse languages absorb vocabulary from Arabic and beyond. A Viking settlement in Constantinople doesn't just trade with Byzantine Greeks. It blends with them, creating something hybrid and entirely new. The medieval world becomes less like a collection of isolated kingdoms and more like an interconnected web, and the Norse sit at the center of that web, holding the threads together with coffee-stained hands. The great irony is that this outcome requires almost nothing. Just a single ship landing in Ethiopia centuries earlier than history records. Just one merchant curious enough to taste coffee. Just one Jarl clear-headed enough to recognize its value. That's all it would have taken to rewrite everything. So here's what I want to know. If you could introduce one thing to a moment in history and reshape the entire world, what would it be? What small change do you think would ripple furthest? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this kind of historical speculation sparked something in you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because the real turning points in history are often the ones nobody saw coming.